Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Ruy Lopez after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5 begins the Ruy Lopez, knight f6 is the Berlin defense, and we're going to be taking a look at one of the anti-Berlins today. We're going to be taking a look at this move pawn to d3, and more importantly, we're going to be taking a look at the delayed exchange variation. So after black plays bishop c5, we're going to be capturing on the c6 square. So if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So why the delayed exchange? And why the anti-Berlin in the first place? Well, the mainline Berlin is just super annoying. You're trying to squeeze water out of a rock. It doesn't seem like you're getting enough out of the position. So people are always trying to find things where they can keep queens on the board, keep a little bit more life in the position, and have chances to play for a win with white, just basically trying to have a position with more life. So this leads people to the anti-Berlin beginning with d3, and then basically it's a choice between playing a delayed exchange or not playing a delayed exchange. So why play a delayed exchange? Well, if you play a delayed exchange, after you take on c6, they have to take back with the d-pawn. And of course, this is for both tactical reasons and positional reasons. The tactical reason is you have to defend against the move knight takes e5. In this case, if knight takes e5, we have the move queen d4, which attacks the knight on e5 and attacks the pawn on f2 and threatens mate. So you're going to win that knight on e5. This is going to be decisive advantage black. So that's the tactical justification. There's also a positional reason. The main positional reason is at some point white wants to play c3 and d4 and get a nice pawn duo in the middle of the board. It's helpful to have a queen that's preventing that. It's helpful to have something on this open file, on the d file, that is preventing that pawn from going to d4. So all that being said, why is white playing a delayed exchange? It does seem a little illogical to a lot of players when they see something like this. Why would I play a delayed exchange? Why not just play the normal exchange variation? Because in the normal exchange variation, you play bishop b5, and then when pawn to a6, you exchange. It feels like black just lost a tempo, and black doesn't have any pieces out in that position. That should be a better version of the exchange than this version of the exchange. And that type of thinking is, in this case, absolutely wrong. And the reason for that is this knight on f6 and this bishop on c5, even though they're developed, they're going to have to move again, because they are not on good squares. And that's the whole reason that people play a delayed exchange. The main compensating factor that black has in an exchange variation for his doubled pawns is the fact that he has two bishops. He has a bishop on c5, a bishop on c8. He has the bishop pair. And if white makes contact with this bishop on c5, like with a knight or with a bishop, black really doesn't want to lose that bishop pair, because that's all he has that's compensating him for his bad pawn structure. So he's going to have to move that bishop again. Another thing is this knight on f6 is not ideally placed. Usually in these positions, this knight would like to eventually put pressure on the f4 square, and also in these positions, at some point you need to defend e5. And the knight is in the way of both of those things. You can't defend d5 with the f-pawn, and you certainly can't get to the f4 square from f6. So you're going to have to redeploy. You'd like to get to the g6 square, and that's usually what ends up happening in these positions, is black spends a lot of moves redeploying his pieces. So here white has two basic plans. He can play the move starting with h3. He can play the plan starting with pawn to h3, which is what Carlsen played against Caruana, which is the game we're going to go over. And we're also going to go over this move knight on b to d2, which is the other plan that you can play in this position. So this first move, pawn to h3, this main idea here of pawn to h3 is just basically this slow deployment of white's pieces and a slow improvement of white's position. So after knight to d7, again, I pointed out, white's going to have to redeploy. Black's going to have to make multiple knight moves and multiple bishop moves. So here we have bishop e3, threatening to take the bishop pair away. So again, got to move this back. So bishop to d6, and now we're going to have knight to c3, and white's development is really smooth and really clean, and black's development is really stunted because he's had to move two pieces several times. So here, black needs to play this move pawn to c5 because white's pieces were beautifully placed for the thrust pawn to d4. So he's basically created a big pawn, is what we call this. So the black bishop on d6 is now a big pawn, and it's pretty easy to look at a position like this in a structure and look at the big pawn on d6 and just kind of declare that white has some sort of slight advantage here. And of course, this is the appeal for playing a position like this with the white pieces. You can look at the position and just say, okay, I have some sort of advantage here with white because that is a big pawn on the d6 square. So this game continued with castles kingside, knight to f8. Again, Caruana's trying to redeploy that knight to the correct location, trying to get it to g6. And we have knight to d2, we have this redeployment, knight to g6, we have knight to c4, which is putting pressure on the d6 square, threatening to get that bishop pair. We have bishop to e6, and then we have knight e2. Now, knight e2 creates kind of a dual threat. He's threatening, Carlsen is threatening to take on d6, And then after cd6, follow up with the move pawn to c4 and create a permanent weakness on the d5 square that he can then exploit. So this is threat number A. Threat number B is to do the same exchange, to play knight takes d6, c takes d6, but then play f4 and get a predominance of pawns in the middle of the board. So like after the exchange e takes f4, knight takes f4, we're going to have two central pawns, an e and a d pawn versus one central pawn versus this one d pawn. So generally speaking, that's a good thing. White should have some sort of advantage in that position. So Caruana's kind of clever about it. He plays queen to d7, and that counters one of those threats. After Carlsen's next move, and he does take his bishop pair back, he plays knight d6, c takes d6. The move c4 is actually off the table. If Carlsen had continued with pawn to c4, Caruana could have sacrificed here. He could have played bishop takes h3, and according to the engine, this is decisive advantage black. So black is kind of whipping up a winning attack in this position. So Carlsen can't play c4, but of course that wasn't really his intention. His intention when he took was to play this move, pawn to f4, and here we can kind of declare that white has some sort of advantage. You can't allow pawn to f5, so you have to capture, and then after knight captures, you have this big predominance of pieces in the middle of the board. You have just slightly better pieces, everything's on slightly better squares, you have two center pawns to black's one. Everything is just generally going very good for white right now. So here you have knight takes f4, rook takes f4. Again, clump of pieces in the middle. Life is good. We have b6, queen h5. Carlsen is just improving his position very naturally, bringing the queen to h5, bringing the other rook to f1, etc., etc., just putting his pieces on natural squares. And that's why Caruana tries to disrupt things in the middle. He tries to play pawn to d5, so it's just not so simple for Magnus to continue improving his position. But Magnus accepts the challenge. He says, "Okay, I want more central space too." So pawn to d4, then we have c4, b3, queen to c6, rook a f1. We have castle's queenside, takes on c4, queen takes c4, and then this very, very pretty exchange sacrifice, rook takes f7, which leads to decisive advantage white. And actually, I don't think other moves led to decisive advantage white. This was just a really good move. Rook f7, bishop f7, rook f7. And really the whole point here is that black's king is unsafe. White's king is safe. And an exchange is a very small price to pay to be able to get at somebody's king and be able to attack it basically for the rest of the game. This weak king in this position is actually a static weakness, meaning permanent weakness. You can't fix it. There is no place for that king to hide permanently anywhere on the board. So the king being attacked is going to be a permanent problem now for the rest of the game. So here we have rook d7, we have this exchange of rooks, we have takes on d5, and now we're going to have combined threats against the king with the threats of advancing these passed pawns. And you can't deal with all of this. So we have g6, queen g4 check, again, very safe king, very unsafe king. That's basically what's going on here. This is just advantage white all day long. King c7, queen e6, king b7, pawn to queen to e7 check, queen back, queen to e4 threatening, pawn to d6 check, queen d7, we play it anyway, pawn to d6 check, king a6, bishop f4, just protecting that passed pawn, rook to c8, king h2, just making our king even more safe on the h2 square, rook c4, again, another prophylaxis move, just bishop g3, tucking everything away, anchoring that bishop, making everything nice and safe, and then preparing to advance our pawns. Queen to d3 check, pawn to c4, just safe king, pawns preparing to advance, permanently unsafe pieces. Eventually, white's going to win, and of course, this is Magnus Carlsen, so you almost don't even want to play positions like this against Magnus because he plays them so well. So he's just, that he's going to press, and that he's eventually going to turn this into a win. So queen c6, queen b3, king a8, a4, rook e8, a5, king b7, c5, king c8, takes, d5 finally breaking through, queen takes, queen a4, rook e3, we have queen check, queen b7, d7 check, and then of course bishop h4 check, and black could resign right here, but he played one more move. He played rook e7 and then resigned after queen c8. Of course, the obvious reason being that he's just down a whole piece after queen c8 takes. King takes, bishop e7, black is down a whole piece. There's not much point in playing on. So that was Carlsen versus Caruana, played back in 2014. And that was kind of the ideas involving this move, pawn to h3. So what's the other move? The other move is this move, knight on b to d2. So kind of the stem game that I'm following here is this game between Liren and Ma, played back in 2018. And again, it's the same type of thing. We're taking advantage of the fact that these two pieces are misplaced, so black is going to have to move these pieces again. He's going to have to move them multiple times. So knight on b to d2, we have bishop to e6, knight to b3, making that bishop move again. Bishop goes back to d6, we're going to have knight a5, rook b8, we're going to have castles, we're going to have castles, we're going to have b3, starting to threaten to fianchetto and put pressure on that e5 pawn, and just kind of making black regret that his knight's on f6. Because it's going to be very difficult to defend that e5 pawn without making some sort of concession. So here we have queen e7, a4, bishop to b4, knight to c4, and here's the point. We have to defend the e5 pawn. We've got two knights attacking it. A bishop can come to b2 and put more pressure on it. At this point, black felt obligated to give up his bishop pair so that he could defend the e5 pawn, and that's the problem with having the knight on f6, and it's the reason most players try to redeploy it. But anyways, bishop takes c4, bc4. And then we have knight to d7, bishop g5, f6, bishop back to e3, bishop c5, knight h4. And here, I prefer white's position here. Even after, the next move or two, I still prefer white's position. White has a lot of space on the king side. White is not lacking a bishop pair in this position. White has better kingside attacking chances, and white has a huge predominance of pawns in the middle of the board. Now, after black plays bishop e3, fe3, I just like white's much simpler plan. White is threatening to play knight f5, queen g4, rook g3 to rook f3 to g3. The other rook can come to f1, etc., etc. Now, all that being said, the computer thinks that all things being equal here, all things are kind of equal. It's difficult for white to advance in the middle of the board, for example. Like if d4, the pawn on e4 is hanging. So it's actually a little bit harder for white to make progress than it would at first appear. So the engine is just kind of giving equality here. It just thinks there's nothing special going on here in this position. So basically, Ding's opponent plays g6 to prevent knight f5. Then we have queen g4, reiterating the threat. Maybe I can play knight f5 later, creating a pin, improving my queen, threatening to lift the rooks. Rook on b to e8, rook f3, queen e6. We have queen back to g3, king f7, and then we have this move pawn to a5, which was apparently the start of kind of a questionable plan on the part of Ding Liren. He probably just should have kept pressing on the king side, and there's just not a whole lot of risk to white's position, even if he doesn't have, any type of huge advantage. But after a5, we had b5, takes, rook a7, and again, optically, it looks to me like white's doing a lot better. He has this disconnected attack going on. He's got an attack on c7, plus he's got stuff going on in the middle of the board. He's got stuff going on over here on the king side, putting pressure on g6, etc. But in reality, black has somewhere between a slight to major advantage. The point being that he can now take over the a file. He could just play rook a8. You don't have, you apparently don't have time, at least according to the engine. You do not have time to play a move like rook takes c7, presumably because, you have problems on the back rank and all kinds of other stuff going on. So here you would have to exchange rooks and then rook takes, and now black has the sole open file. You have to play this move rook f1 to cover your back rank, and then rook c2 is apparently slight edge black according to the engine. But again, I do like white's attacking chances here, even though this position objectively, I guess, is slight edge black. So instead of that, though, Ding Liren got lucky. His opponent hunkered down and defended. So after queen to d6, queen to h3, king e7, rook f1, the position is apparently back to equal. We have rook a8 takes, and here we have knight f3, h5, queen g3, g5, queen back to f2, queen to e6. And then we have this break in the middle of the board, d4, c5, d5, queen back to g8, and then pawn to h4, which is a really good move by Ding Liren because it induced this blunder. His opponent played g takes h4, kind of big question mark move here, and that allowed knight takes h4, and now there's nothing preventing that knight coming from f5, and when it gets there, it's just going to be, advantage white. White's just doing much, much better here. So we have this knight takes h4, rook a2, knight to f5 check, advantage white, king back to d6, queen d2, rook a3, rook f3, h4, rook h3, rook a4, rook takes, and now this combination, like rook takes c4 was probably a mistake because there's this combination that black missed. White just continues with pawn to d6, and here's the point. After cd6, white is going to play knight takes d6, and black's rook on c4 is attacked, but there's a secondary threat that is a much bigger deal. And that is after rook to a4, pause the video, see if you can find the move. White can win the game with the move rook to h8, which attacks the queen, and the queen has to take the rook because the queen is pinned to the king. And if queen takes rook, we simply have knight f7 check, forking king and queen. And after the king moves, we take the queen, and we have a queen and a knight versus a rook and a knight. And of course, a queen and a knight is better than a rook and a knight. And at the highest levels, there's not much point in playing on after that. So anyways, those are the main ideas. You have these, basically these two options, against, this setup. You have this knight on b to d2 option, and of course you also have this, pawn to h3 option, following one of those two plans, as those two top players did in those games. So anyways, I hope you learned something new about chess. I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.